Moving on to agenda item 5.01, Facilities Committee Report. Who is going to be introducing this? Dr. Kellogg, you?
Actually, I'm going to introduce Mr. LaRose and his team. He's going to come forward with kind of a three-part presentation night, so we'll start off with Mr. LaRose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kellogg, members of the board. As Dr. Kellogg said, this presentation is being delivered in three parts. So I will be providing a summary of the information that was presented to the committee in the preparation for their work. Members of the committee will present their facility master planning recommendations, and Dr. Kellogg will follow up with next steps for the board's consideration. So last December, as part of the annual facility master plan update, the board supported our recommendation to develop a long-range building renovation and replacement program. The board also requested that the 10-year enrollment forecast be updated, which we completed in March. In April, the board approved entering into an active planning process with the Ohio School Facilities Commission. This includes conducting a building condition assessment for each school. The results of this assessment are due in March of 18. The board also requested a second condition assessment outside of the OSFC that is being finalized by Triad Architects. To help in the development of a long-range plan for our building, a committee was established in May and June, with the first committee meeting occurring in July. And in November, the committee's recommendations were presented to Dr. Kellogg, and these recommendations are being shared with you this evening. The committee consists of 27 members that represent high school academic boosters, parent council, the Westerville Chamber of Commerce, the City of Westerville, Genoa Township, Minerva Park, Westerville Partners for Education, the Westerville Education Foundation, the WEA, our school board, and school administration. The committee's purpose is to present a long-range planning recommendation that addresses district school building needs involving aging infrastructure, forecasted student enrollment, current and forecasted curriculum needs, and building safety and security needs. The committee met 7 times starting in July. We discussed the condition of our building infrastructure as well as our forecasted enrollment. In August, we reviewed program space needs as recommended by the executive directors of elementary and secondary education. In September, the committee toured selected schools to evaluate the conditions firsthand. Also in September, the committee reviewed cost options ranging from building renovation to building replacement. In early October, the committee requested a work session to discuss the information presented to date. And later that month, the Treasurer's Office presented financing options ranging from no new taxes to a community-approved bond. In November, the committee held an additional work session to finalize their recommendations. And during both work sessions, the committee spent time discussing options without the presence of school administration. And on November 15th, these recommendations were presented to Dr. Kellogg. This is a slide we presented at the July meeting that shows the schools that the Ohio School Facilities Commission recommended for replacement from their condition assessment in 2001. And in an effort to narrow the focus, the committee selected to build their recommendations around schools that are currently 55 years and older. And this includes Emerson, Hanby, Longfellow, Central College, Whittier, Hawthorne, and South. This slide shows the building components that architects and engineers have and are evaluating as part of the condition assessment. In 2001, the identified needs totaled $112 million. We have some preliminary information coming in from Triad's assessment that totals around $125 million at this time, but that's currently being reviewed and updated. Some fun facts. This slide reflects some of the events that occurred when our schools were built. For example, South was completed in 1960, the same year Bedrock's Stone Age family, the Flintstones, premiered. Now that's old, right? Hawthorne was completed in 1957, the year American Bandstand first aired on TV. And when Whittier was built in 1952, kids did not have computer games. They were playing with potatoes, as shown here with the debut of Mr. Potato Head. Hanby opened the same year the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated in 1922. Central College, 1931, the same year of Little Orphan Annie's first radio transmission. Longfellow also opened in 1931, the same year the Star-Spangled Banner was adopted as our national anthem. And Emerson, built in 1896, was the same year that Utah became the 45th state. We presented our student enrollment update to the committee that is forecasting by FY27 elementary enrollment will increase by 140 students from this year's enrollment, middle school by 227, and high school by 346. And based on current school capacities, we are projecting being over capacity at the middle and high school levels. We also shared the additional number of classrooms requested for elementary programming, program growth, and that is an additional 15 classrooms to support all-day kindergarten, 3 additional classrooms for special ed, and 11 classrooms for limited English proficient classes. School administration shared the recommended capacity for an elementary school to be between 450 and 600 students, and this is based on a team teaching approach with 3 to 4 teachers or classrooms per grade level. And shown in red font are the schools that are outside of this range. 7 of the 16 elementaries are highlighted as being outside of the desired capacity range. Faust and Alcott, both above 600. Central College, Emerson, Hanby, Longfellow, and Whittier, under 450. For middle school, school administration recommends a capacity of 600 to 700 students, equating to 200 to 250 students per grade level. And that is similar to what we have at Blendon currently. So 3 of our 4 middle schools exceed this range: Genoa, Heritage, and Walnut Springs. Scott Reeves shared that our middle schools are operating at the capacity of a typical high school in most districts. For an elementary school classroom, the OSFC recommends 900 square feet for a typical classroom. Shown in red font under the square feet header are the elementary schools where classroom sizes are under 700 square feet. All of the classrooms at Central College, Hanby, and Longfellow are all under 700 square feet. In August, our curriculum department presented to the committee the components of a 21st century classroom consisting of multiple use learning zones, mobile and comfortable furniture, a robust technology infrastructure that is readily available, spaces that are accessible for all students, inspirational in design with quality acoustics and lighting with lots of display and work surface space. We discussed the effect of the physical environment on student achievement. One study conducted in England by architects and university officials concluded that the classroom environment can affect academic progress by as much as 25% over 1 year. And this study was reviewed and accepted by an international peer group. This slide was shown to the committee to illustrate the potential to add additional instructional space in the southern part of the district where we have the highest density of students and the fewest schools. We are showing approximately 15 acres east of Farview Drive across from Hawthorne and another 14.7 acres on the former Minerva Park Golf Course shown at the bottom left. This chart summarizes elementary concerns in reference to student capacity, classroom size, the size of the dining areas, land availability, the condition of the infrastructure, and 21st century design. What it does is reinforce the focus on Central College, Emerson, Hanby, Hawthorne, Longfellow, and Whittier. And the same thing for middle and high school, showing a focus on student capacity concerns for middle school and building infrastructure concerns at South High School. Concerns with 21st century design were discussed at all schools across the district, less Pointview that we renovated and expanded in 2016. And this slide summarizes the additional information that the committee requested and was provided during our journey to support them in making their recommendations. The cost to renovate schools over 55 years in age, the feasibility to expand or repurpose schools with a student capacity under 300, including the feasibility to add space for the elementary magnet program and all-day kindergarten. The feasibility to expand student capacity in the southern part of our district, the feasibility to add space for middle school programming, and the feasibility to enclose classrooms at Annehurst, similar to what we achieved at Pointview. So I would now like to introduce two of our Planning Committee members, Liz Washburn, President of the Westerville Parent Council, and Jack Brown, representing the Westerville Partners for Education, who will be presenting the committee's recommendations.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, President Velardo and members of the board. My name is Liz Washburn. I am president of Westerville Parent Council, and along with me is Jack Brown of Westerville Partners for Education, and we are just two of the 27 members that make up the Facilities Committee. I want to thank you, Dr. Kellogg, just for the opportunity to be a part of this committee. It's been a privilege to work alongside of community members, local business owners, representatives from local municipalities, fellow parents, and Westerville City Schools administrators. The committee understands that after the receipt of our recommendation that there will be community outreach and feedback before the school board has the opportunity to make final decisions. And then that you as the board also may decide something different than our recommendations. Our recommendation, though, is made being mindful of producing a fiscally responsible plan, which work on multiple school buildings can be done without additional tax money, if that is what is decided. There are a number of recommendations that would require significant community discussion and understanding, and risk management is a consideration in all facility decisions when talking about the rehabilitation, acquisition, or suspension of any properties. The following recommendations account for maintaining the high-quality educational opportunities as well as student safety and building maintenance as priorities. This recommendation provides for an expansion of a capacity of an additional 1,330 students and impacts a minimum of 7 school buildings. The physical renovation of Pointview Elementary sets a good example of working within our resources to produce an exciting educational experience, and that which can be used for future Westerville City School facility renovations. Our recommendation is divided into 3 priority levels: critical, important, and when funds allow. All recommendations, though, we view as valuable and important, but felt it necessary to divide for planning. Of critical importance, priority 1, we see that South High School, and this is in no order within these as well, but South High School, we looked at information received from district administrators, ranging from different renovations starting at $13 million and several in between, all the way up to a rebuild of $51 million. The committee recommends a full renovation in tune with a $34 million proposal. This would allow for 21st century design, needed building updates, and necessary expansion. A major renovation would be possible, and it would still yet allow for Westerville City School facility priorities to move forward in other buildings as well. It addresses the needs for curriculum development and workforce development as well within the high school level. Also, as a priority one for us, we saw that adding a new middle school. The Farview property is the most feasible property for a new middle school complex. The new middle school is essential to fix the overcrowding population across the district at the middle school level and allows for students at the south end of the district to be served. Also of critical importance, the committee felt it valuable that we would continue allowing for safety issues to be addressed. Parents and committee members have expressed concerns as far as example would be parking lot lights, things like that. You know, we want to add and increase buildings, but we also want to continue our plans with those safety issues and concerns, just as you have plans now and in the works to address those needs. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jack for priority 2.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, President Velardo, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg. Tier 2, which the committee overwhelmingly felt was important to fund with the available funds that we envisioned. First, and again in no particular order within Tier 2, renovate and expand aging elementary schools. That would include renovate and expand Longfellow, Whittier, and renovate Hawthorne for a capacity increase between the 3 schools of 450. The committee's rationale for this, in light of the age, condition of the buildings, the amount of space available on these properties, and the current and projected enrollment needs, we feel with renovations, these buildings will well serve Westerville City School students well into the future. The second Tier 2 recommendation is add a new Minerva Park Elementary School. Our rationale was the new Minerva Park Elementary School will allow students in the south side of the district to have a neighborhood school for existing students who are now being bused elsewhere and for new facilities, new families moving into the area. The third bullet point, again in no particular order, sell Hanby and Emerson and redistribute the student populations to other Westerville City School buildings. We defer to the district on proper housing of the magnet and A&T programs after Hanby and Emerson are sold. Our rationale for this recommendation: the committee recognizes the historical importance of these buildings, and we envision a reuse that maintains the historical shell and new uses that contribute to the character of Uptown Westerville. Existing space in these historical buildings do not allow for programs, both new and expanded, that the staff and faculty envision for the current and future student populations. These programs could be accommodated better within the other renovated and expanded elementary schools. The sale of these buildings also could potentially offset $7 million in other building improvements. If these buildings are sold, it would provide additional resources to renovate the above-mentioned buildings to meet the future curriculum and population needs of the district. The next point is keep Central College land for a potential newly constructed elementary school building at a later time. Our rationale here is these 5 acres are located in the right area for population growth and access. The aging building is currently leased to Head Start. But the land remains valuable to the district for future needs. Due to the condition of the existing building, the committee does not recommend renovation. And finally, on Tier 2, explore how to accommodate all-day kindergarten. Our rationale here is to eliminate a wait list for those families choosing all-day kindergarten. Capacity at elementary schools should be increased to accommodate this increase. All-day kindergarten is both an academic booster and a workforce amenity in the opinion of the Facilities Planning Committee. Okay, and finally, Tier 3. These would all be good for the district when funding permits. First, renovate and expand Annehurst Elementary. When the budget allows, the Annehurst Elementary School facility needs to be brought up to date, enclosing all classrooms and adding capacity to meet the district programming needs. And then finally, explore how to accommodate new magnet opportunities and other in-demand curriculum items such as the Westerville North High School shop, newly constructed facility. And that concludes the 3 tiers, and at this point we'll be turning over to Dr. Kellogg.
Before I go to the podium, I wanted to see if the board had any questions for Mr. LaRose or for the committee members first. I think it might be, unless you want me to just go ahead, I'll leave it up to you. I thought it might break.
What do you think? You have some questions now?
I'd like to hold off until after to ask questions.
Questions now?
I can wait.
Richard? Okay.
So before I bring forward my review of the committee report and some opportunities for the board, I wanted to kind of rewind the tape a second. So if you go back in this history that Jeff presented to 2001, which was the starting point of an original OFCC study, Ohio Facilities Commission, you see the recommendations that were made back in 2001 and where we are today, where many of those recommendations that were there in 2001 are now coming forward again in some form or fashion outside of OFCC internally. I think that's important to note, because what it means is since 2001, we've continued to maintain those buildings and run programming in the district with the resources we have to the best of our ability in moving things forward. And I think there's a lot of people who go into making that happen, from custodians to maintenance folks to transportation to principals to teachers all across the district, that have allowed us to continue to stretch the resources we have to see how far we can go. And the question as we move forward is, are we at the time now where we can't afford to kick the can down the road any further? There are parts of this recommendation that I think are clear. The other parts I think get a little bit murkier and going to be a little bit more difficult for us in the community as we move along. But I wanted to point that out. I also wanted to take a moment at the end. We'll have the slide with all the committee members. But I wanted to thank the committee members because there was a lot of time and energy. And I sat in on most of the meetings and watched their work. The energy and enthusiasm and detail that they went at it, and we didn't pay them anything but lunch, was really remarkable. Their insights, their thoughts, the questions they asked, the data they wanted to see, the information they wanted to move along. And that was a rather rapid pace to bite into the facilities question for a school district that they did. And so hats off to them for the outstanding work. I think the recommendations they put forward to the board are very clear and dead on with the information that we have. So I've taken time since then to review the report, and I want to bring forward some thoughts from my seat to the board and then talk about what next steps would be. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the report itself, what I see some limitations and some opportunities, where I think we need to do next, some financial considerations, and then I want to keep an eye on the prize of this is one part of the fleet of buildings that we have. Behind it, there's another fleet, and we need to take a look at that and be mindful to the long term of this thing. So limitations, and I don't mean limitations that the committee didn't give thought to these things. I think many of the committee members would point to these as being either undecided or limitations about where we're at that are going to need more opportunity for more discussion. And the first one, I think Liz said it right up front, is this is a starting point for a community conversation. This isn't the end point of a community conversation. This is a starting point for a community conversation. So we're going to have to look some more at that. The cost estimates that Jeff has provided that were in the slides, these are exactly that. They're estimates. These are not actual numbers yet. And so anybody walking on the room who wants to quote the numbers, keep in mind we're not at a point where we know what the numbers are. We have good estimates, but we don't have final numbers yet. The other thing is, and although it's mentioned in the report, the financing of the final solution is still something that has to be hashed out. There is very clearly an opportunity for what some people would describe as a no new tax option. We have the ability to leverage our permanent improvement levy, which brings in roughly $9 million a year. And because you have that permanent revenue stream, there's a financial opportunity to use that permanent revenue stream to essentially take a loan on the district's behalf over a time period. We use the revenue for that to pay down the loan in order to fund a construction project, which would mean we're staying in our permanent improvement or capital improvement budget. So there is that opportunity depending on what this whole process brings forward in terms of how we want to fund this thing. Doesn't eliminate the opportunity or the need to go to the voters or some partnership between both those solutions, but that solution does exist. The other piece I just want to remind us is we have committed to partnering with OFCC. That does not mean we have to do an OFCC project. So for the community's understanding, we've partnered with OFCC, which means in the first leg of that journey, they can do a facilities analysis, much like Triad did for us with some cost analysis like you saw before. They also do their own enrollment update, and they use that data to present us a facilities master plan. So we go faster than most state agencies, and in this case we have. We're a bit further along in the process than they are, but we expect that sometime around March they'll have their final report for us. I would not anticipate that the kinds of projects we're looking at, the bulk of them probably do not lend themselves well to an OFCC co-funded project. I do think there's components in there that may have an opportunity for a co-funded project. It's just something that has to be looked at down the line. For those who don't know of OFCC, it's a state agency, receives state funding. Depending on the economics of your school district, the percentage of the project can be financed through that OFCC money. And so it would be an opportunity for us to decrease the cost to our taxpayers through the OFCC program. The other thing to consider in this whole big picture is, though all this is furniture and equipment and buildings, and it's all generally capital improvements, there are operational costs within this. If you open a school, even if you're consolidating schools, when you're moving staff, et cetera, somewhere down the line there's going to be operational costs. It's not a zero-sum game, both in terms of maintaining facilities during a renovation. I don't know the magnitude of a renovation at South, and I don't know what that means in terms of how we operate school while the renovations are going on, what that means for us in terms of classroom space. But there will be operational dollars that have to be associated with this along the way. If you open a building, there's administrative costs, there's custodial costs, et cetera. The other piece, and I think the committee did a nice job of this one, in their recommendations for Hanby and Emerson, they're very clear that it's not about eliminating programming, it's about facilities. But what they've asked or moved to administration to consider is, in the recommendations they've made, there's space and room for that programming, but they've given it to us to decide or have a process for deciding how we might want to house those programming. So that's a solution that's not clear yet, but one that needs to be worked on. Opportunities from this, the greatest opportunity in this entire recommendation is the fact that it does clearly take care of infrastructure needs that are some critical buildings for us. There's a point of no return when you're kicking the can down the road. We have to be careful there. It clearly provides opportunities at the middle school level. We are in a process now with the middle school design team, and that's going to be a lengthy process where they're looking at programming at middle school and what we want middle school to look like. We want to take our middle schools to a whole nother level. The recommendations that they make regarding a middle school to South in the district, which would redistribute some population of students, would provide space at all the middle schools for additional programming that we might want to put in place down the line for our middle school students. And it adds capacity across the district, as the recommendations show. A good portion of that is at the south end of the district. I'm going to give you a couple of quick numbers I was doing today. So I won't do it open mic style, but there are roughly 6,600 students south of 270 in our school district. So if you use that as the south end and forget, there's the east-west border, but the south end down, there's roughly 6,600 of our 15,000 students housed down there. there's exactly 2 schools south of 270, Huber Ridge and Hawthorne, for a total, and that's just elementary, seats of about 1,100. So we are, through transportation, transporting a lot of students northward in the district to other schools. And we know what that looks like. We know what neighborhood schools look like. We've all seen the map. This does add a lot of capacity down at that end for our families and make more neighborhood schools. It's a great opportunity. It does continue to emphasize elementary magnet program. In fact, it maintains it and provides opportunity for enhancing. There's even a recommendation there for possible increase depending on what we do with facilities. It does maintain our self-contained elementary program, and it considers opportunities to move forward with all-day kindergarten. And I think it may not get as much attention as I think it should, but this whole concept of 21st century design and what we could be doing in classroom spaces, I think is a huge win for our students, for our staff. So we're talking, you know, Jeff's pictures of the year and what was popular is pretty poignant. And if people have heard me say this before, 1973-74, I believe, was the year the federal government adopted the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, which recognized the status of special education students, gave them opportunities and access to public schools. Anything built before that time period was built before there was special education. So that's what, 30-something years, 40-something years? We have a lot of buildings where we're making spaces, carving out spaces in buildings for students whose learning needs are some of the most difficult to overcome, and putting them in spaces that may be the least inspiring at all. So the growth in those components of public education and just the impact of the 21st century, remind you it's 2017, almost 2018, we're still talking about moving to the 21st century, I think can't be understated. And as the committee pointed out, if you look at some of the work we have done, Pointview would be a place to look at, the shop at North, as well as the Center for Inspiration at Walnut Springs, demonstrates the kind of work we can do here in partnership with our agency. So I think there's some great opportunities there. So what's next? As the committee suggested, we've started sketching out, the administrative team has started sketching out a community involvement schedule. The first phase being multiple opportunities for people to engage with us. We are working with an online feedback tool that we would roll out. We have already scheduled myself and members of our team to go out to the various schools to have discussions with all the staffs so they have an idea of what's in the recommendations and know what's coming. We'll open ourselves up to any school groups that want us to come in and talk about it and then have a conversation. So any of our PTOs out there, any of our booster groups, we're receptive to doing that. We'd like to set up some community meetings, be in people's homes in various communities, sit down, have coffee, talk about the plan, hear what people's thoughts are. We'll just continue all the conversations we can, telephone polls. So we have a multi-pronged approach to a first phase of community involvement. We've sketched that out to probably, depending on where the board asks us to be, but we would suggest that we'd like to get started in mid-January and that first phase done before we hit March. As I show up here, the second phase of that, which would really be dependent upon the first phase, this is a fast pace. This is a fast pace for community engagement, which is why it's multiple pronged. After the first phase ending in March, we'll turn around that data, work with the board, design a second phase, see what we need to do, and try and wrap that all up by May of 2018. As I said, I think that's a tremendously aggressive community engagement timeline. I think it's hopeful. I think it's optimistic, which is the way I like to be. It's possible that something in that process gives us information we've missed so far that may slow it down or may speed parts of it up. I'm not sure yet, but we need to do that. We'd also like to sit down with the building staff at the 4 schools that are slated for renovations, and we have an understanding of the infrastructure problems, right? Staff doesn't look at HVAC systems. They're not looking at boiler rooms. They're not looking at electrical panels. They're not up on the roofs. They'll tell you when there's a leak or when the air conditioning is not working well, but they're not looking at the systems. So we have that information and that data and those costs. What we like to hear from those staff is just to talk about, in your current building, what are the limitations to teaching and learning? What might be some enhancements, some opportunities to improve this building if this is the path we lead down? It's not a design phase. It's more of a gathering information about what the limitations of that current building are and how we might address that. The big question, I think this is the one that is going to take the most time to discuss. I thought the committee did an excellent job of framing this recommendation, particularly the piece about Hanby and Emerson, where they're recommending, and I think they said it quite well. In my words, the inefficiencies that exist there really can't be resolved. The programming is great. The staff are great. The families are great. But the facility doesn't support the kind of programming we want to have go on there. And we think we can do better there. But particularly those two buildings, in light of the recommendations, I would suggest need a lot more further community engagement based on what the committee's given us. They've given us a good foundation to start the conversation, but I think it's going to take a lot more conversation. I think their recommendations about Central College and Longfellow are dead on in terms of their efficiencies. There is greater land space there, which makes replacements or renovations there a stronger possibility, and maintaining, particularly with Longfellow, just its presence in that neighborhood and the look that it has, I think is kind of important. Other considerations, as the committee pointed out, safety upgrades. We want to make sure that our buildings are safe. We want to continue talking about all-day kindergarten. And we have coming forward the recommendations from the Learning and Teaching Roadmap, our revised version. We're working on the draft of it now, but it has some recommendations about enhanced opportunities for students to have devices. And that report as well, coming from staff, takes a close look at furniture and spaces and aligns very well with Mr. LaRose's and the committee's recommendations about 21st century learning. So I think it's December 11th, we're really early. We have a great opportunity to see how that roadmap will dovetails in with this project and where the partnership might be. Then the big one is probably the financial commitments. I would recommend the following. Regardless of how the board and the community decide to go down on the path of financing this thing, when I look at our current general funds and capital improvement funds, I would recommend that any financing of the facilities comes solely from what I would describe as capital improvement funds, using that permanent improvement dollars, or if necessary, going on the ballot for a bond issue in order to support this. As I look at our 5-year forecast and where we're at and where we've been and where we're trying to go, I think we're in a position where we can address our facilities needs without disturbing the projections of our general fund right now. And that goes to I'm really saying the same thing twice here. The project shouldn't, and echoing what the committee said, we don't want to tie up so much money in the recommendations that we cannot continue to address our current 5-year capital improvement plan. We can't sacrifice current needs for what we're trying to do. So there's got to be a balance in there of how we're doing our funding. And we've seen some preliminary information that shows us we can do that. We just have to be thoughtful about it. And I also would prefer that we take a look at this, and again, it's kind of redundant to the first part, don't want to do anything to substantially alter the 5-year forecast. Clearly, some of the shakeups in here, new buildings, closing some buildings, will shape operational costs down the line, but I think those can be managed in a way where we don't substantially change our 5-year forecast and change commitments we've made to the community and future needs for general fund dollars to operate our buildings. In short, I don't want to be one of those school districts that builds a building, opens it, and then doesn't have the funds to open it and run it. I've seen that happen. So I think we need to give some strong consideration to financial commitments, which really are contingent upon what the final plan is. You have a framework for a start of a plan that's still got some wiggle room. We just want to be careful. And lastly, I want to remind us all that there's a whole phase of buildings behind us. I kind of cut our building fleet into three groups. It's this tier that's in there today, the 7 buildings. Here would be the next tier. So none of these made. That 55-year-old cut was hard for me because I'll be 56 in June. So what I just heard is I'm obsolete, which my children tell me sometimes. So you can see that.
Would you like to put some renovation in there?
I had 2 weeks ago, I had that done.
You did have some renovation, didn't you?
Bionic man. So there's that next fleet of buildings that are getting close to that 55 age. So going back to my start about, in 2001, we started one place. We've managed to keep it together, but there's kind of a set of waves coming. The more we delay, those 7 buildings are on the list, or that first phase of projects, the sooner these then enter into that same place. And behind that are some buildings that are younger that have a little more life in them. So that's the other piece, is this next phase. So there are, I think, 5 big questions for the board to consider in the coming weeks. One is the question of, based on what you've heard tonight, do you want administration to move forward with developing a community involvement process? I've laid out conceptually an idea for you that would begin in January. This is our last board meeting until the new meeting in January, so we're looking for feedback, and it can come tonight, or you can discuss and let us know about whether or not you want us to start that community involvement process. 2, I think it would be, or we think it would be advisable, if we are going to go down that path, to start talking to the building staffs to look at what the limitations of those buildings are educationally today. 3, based on the recommendations from that committee and knowing community sentiment around Hanby and Emerson, would you like us to begin any kind of targeted community engagement specifically around those 2 buildings, and what the community sentiment is around the recommendations and how to move forward on that? A 5th one would be clarifying those financial commitments that we talked about, general fund, permanent improvement, bond issues. And the last one would be, assuming we do number 1, which I'm highly suspect we will be, we'll bring back that first phase of community involvement to you when it's done to design the second to see where we're at. So those are questions for the board we have this evening for you to chew on, give us feedback on either tonight or in the future. And finally, here is the list of very talented and committed people who came forward and just provided tremendous leadership in this entire process. And so I want to thank each of them for that time and their energy. They did some pretty fun stuff. They asked for work sessions. They asked for more information. They asked us to take our lunch and leave the room so they could talk behind closed doors without us. They met outside time. They did great, great work. And so on behalf of our administrative team, and I know the board, I'd like to thank each of them this evening for that work and their efforts on this project. I think they did an outstanding job. So thank you to all of them. And that concludes the report. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you have for me or any of the presenters. I'll turn it over to you all.